Just a quick response to the governor's letter earlier today. I did send a letter back to the governor indicating on the tax provisions that we were in agreement with the two things that he had concerns about in the tax bill. So that should free up and get us to agreement on the tax bill that would provide that he can now sign that bill. And then once he's done that, we're obviously happy to visit with him about the other provisions that are in his bill. So I'm not sure I have a whole lot to say, but we do agree with the governor. We think those two provisions are very easy to agree to for the tax bill, and we do want to get that bill wrapped up.
What about the rest of his demands about transportation, higher education, whole basket of things?
You know, we've got staff looking into all of those things, and obviously some of them I think are new provisions. Some of them are things that he has requested in the past. Some of them I think we need more information about. Some of them are not completely clear. For instance, the transit piece. He's not indicating what his requirement would be for transit in the bill. He just says that he wants it to include some transit. The bonding bill that we passed did have some pretty significant transit pieces in the bill, both the Orange Line to the South Metro and the transit station at the Mall of America, which is the busiest transit station in the state. So, you know, I don't know exactly what he's talking about. I guess we'll need more information on those things. But we wanted to get to agreement at least on the tax bill so that he can sign that and we can move on to the transportation and bonding provisions.
To fix the problems in the tax bill, you would need a special session and you would need to agree on a special...
Just wait 1 second, Rachel, I apologize.
Go ahead. To fix the problems in the tax bill, you would need a special session to pass a revisers or technical corrections bill to fix that. So don't you need agreement on a special session to agree on the tax bill?
The one provision we believe can be fixed, the one where the word is different, we believe can be fixed without a legislative session, a special session. But the other one, to include the money for the high school league, obviously would require a special session. We're happy to do that. We're happy to agree to both of those provisions. So when we do get to agreement on a special session, the governor can rest assured that we will fix both of those. If we don't get to agreement on anything else, we'll just have a special session to fix those two things. We're happy to do that. So once we have agreement on those two things, we have agreement on those two things. So he can feel free to sign that tax bill, and we can move on to discussing the other provisions in his letter.
What about the timing? The governor says as soon as next week. Does that seem feasible for you?
Potentially. You know, we obviously want to honor his request to keep these separate and take action on the bills that are in front of him. I think I don't know if he's signed everything except the tax bill. I think there might be a couple of other bills outstanding, but we want to give him the time to take care of those. And I think that now we have agreement on the tax bill and how to fix those provisions. He can take action on the tax bill and sign that. That should then, you know, allow us the ability to visit about the rest of it. And I think we could do it as soon as next week, but I don't want to say that, you know, we agree to everything else that is in his letter. We need to do some more research on those items. We need to take a look at what action we did take during the legislative session on those areas, why there might be differences in what he's requesting. Also get more information from him on some of the items that he's requesting.
How is his level of supplemental spending going to go over with your caucus, the additional money? Like
a lead balloon, probably, but that's part of negotiations, right? I mean, I'm not drawing any lines in the sand to say we will or will not. You know, the governor obviously took action on the supplemental budget bill today. To me, that indicated that he was in agreement on the level of spending in the supplemental budget bill. However, there are some additional requests in his bill. I think we need more information on those items that are in his request, and also you know, we'll have to discuss with our caucus. And I'm one leader out of four. That letter went to all four legislative leaders, so I think he's obviously requesting input from all of the leaders.
Well, the governor did say that he wants all of this or none of it. He won't call the session, but there are some big items in there. The University of Minnesota Science Building, the St. Peter's security. Those are really big items.
You know, I assume that the governor is going to be reasonable. I'm going to take his word that he's going to be reasonable. If he's not, if he's going to have everything exactly the way he wants it, or he's not going to call a special session, it's probably going to be difficult to get there. And I think that's really unfortunate. The bill that we passed on the last night of session out of the House had $700 million of road and bridge money in it all over the state of Minnesota, along with other really great projects that were, frankly, some of the governor's #1 priorities, like water. there was a lot of $200 million worth of clean water money in that bill. That was one of the governor's #1 priorities, and I think he's going to want that. It'll be a shame to see that go down because he doesn't get everything he wants in the bill. And I think Minnesotans are going to expect the governor to be reasonable, just like he's expecting us to be reasonable. And part of being reasonable is being willing to compromise. So I'm going to assume that the governor's going to live up to his word and that he's going to be able to compromise through this process.
Could you address the earmarks in the bonding bill for transportation the governor had highlighted?
Well, they arose because of the legislative auditor's report that basically chided the MnDOT for not following an orderly process in determining which projects should get funded. So we wanted to make sure that we funded and put money towards some of the biggest projects that were considered to be some of the most important transportation projects in the state. Things like Highway 23, things like Highway 14, the most dangerous stretch of highway in the state, Highway 12. So we literally wanted to name those projects as being priorities and make sure that they get funding in this bill. We think that's important. And Minnesotans support that, and they're not partisan.
The legislative audit report also chided the legislature for earmarking transportation funding, so you didn't read that page?
There is history of doing it, and we chose to do it, and that's our position. If the governor wants to talk to us about that, obviously we're willing to talk. But if the governor doesn't want to fund Highway 23 or Highway 14 or Highway 12, I don't think I'm going to be the governor's biggest problem. I think the folks in those communities are going to be the governor's biggest problem. Those are big projects that have been talked about for, I think I said it wrong on the case of Highway 14. I think I said 20 or more years. I think it may be 40 years that they've been talking about Highway 14. These are not unreasonable projects that are things that we just stuck in there because we wanted to get an earmark. These are projects that Minnesotans all over the state have been talking about, not only the commerce and the convenience, but the safety of people living in these communities traveling on these dangerous stretches of highway. So we wanted to make sure we got them fixed, and so we named them in the bill. And if the governor doesn't want to fix Highway 14, I'm not going to be the problem that the governor has. I think the people in the communities along Highway 14 are going to have a bigger problem with the governor.
Mr. Speaker, the governor says that he wants the Met Council to be able to have the latitude to move forward with transit projects and specifically light rail, Southwest light rail, without the state kicking in money. Is that a non-starter as far as you're?
Well, I think we just need to have that discussion with the governor. We need more conversation with the governor about what he intends and how Met Council or CTIB would move forward, what that looks like, who would pay the ongoing operating costs. So we just don't have enough information to even comment on whether that would be something that would be included.
Something that would enable Southwest light rail to move forward in whatever way, whether it be without state money, is that problematic as far as your caucus is concerned?
Again, it's not my responsibility to sell Southwest Light Rail, and I want to remind folks that Southwest Light Rail is so controversial that there are 2 pending lawsuits trying to stop Southwest Light Rail right now. So we're not saying absolutely not, but it's also not my responsibility to sell it to the public and convince people that this is a good project that must happen. Whoever the proponents of the project are need to make that case. And with 2 pending lawsuits, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for us to be moving forward, but I'm willing to be reasonable and I'm willing to compromise and I'm willing to listen to the governor. If he's willing to do those same things, I think we'll have a productive conversation.
Just so I understand how you're assessing this, you seem to be separating what needs to be done to get the tax bill signed by Monday and potentially maybe just a special session dealing with that and then continue the conversations on the other stuff?
No, I don't think we need to have a separate special session. I think what the governor needed and wanted was just agreement that we would agree to fix those 2 things. We are agreeing to fix those 2 things. We'll do it in special session. We'll do one of them by letter if that's acceptable to the governor. Or if we can't get to agreement on a special session, we'd be happy to have a special session just for that purpose. But we're honoring the governor's request to keep taxes and spending separate from transportation and bonding. That's his request to us, and I am going to honor that. I don't want to step on the governor's toes and say that we should get this all included into one big agreement. So I know the governor's not asking for that because he's been very specific about saying that he wants them separate. I happen to agree with him. They should be separate, and they will be separate. If he chooses to try to change his mind now and bungle things up, I think people are going to blame him for trying to kill funding for roads, and I know that's not his intent.
So you're saying the stadium tax issue could be dealt with just by legislative intent, some letter to say this is what we meant to say?
Unfortunately, and I always hate when there's an error in a bill, but it happens more frequently than people know. Our nonpartisan staff does a phenomenal job here, and I don't know what exactly happened, why that word was wrong. but I'm going to defend them and say that they did a wonderful job preparing that bill. We have in the past, in those sorts of instances, issued letters of legislative intent by the authors of the bills and the chairs of the conference committees, and those have been sufficient until we can get to the next legislative session to actually put a legislative fix in place. So we are open to that if the governor's open to that. However, he had the additional requirement that he wanted the tax relief for tickets at sporting events, for high school league events, and if that's important to him, it's certainly fine with us. So it would take legislative action, obviously, to enact that provision. So I don't know how exactly we'll proceed on those, but we just wanted the governor to know that we agree to those. Feel free to sign the bill. Let's get that bill signed and out of the way, and then we can move on to discussing the other provisions.
So you're telling the governor, Mr. Speaker, that you're willing to issue a letter of legislative intent that essentially agrees with what he's stating the problem is?
Yes, I think everybody is on the same page to understand that should have been an or instead of an and, or an and instead of an or, whatever it was. Everybody agrees that was a mistake, and that it probably does change the intent of the language. We do believe there are, you have to be creative in how you interpret it to get to what they're suggesting, but we also know that folks that have an incentive and have attorneys can go to court and try to get it enacted to the letter of the law. So we are willing to take whatever action is necessary to put it back to its original legislative intent.
Even if there's not an agreement on the transportation, the bonding provisions, at this point you're saying definitively, unequivocally, that you would agree to a special session on just those two items.
If we can't get to agreement on the other things, I think we can get to agreement on everything, but I think we're going to have to see some flexibility and some compromise from the governor on the other things as well. And that's not just for me to say. He has sent that letter to all of the legislative leaders. And I'll remind folks that the bills that we've passed at the end of session were true compromise bills that were broadly supported from both sides of the aisle, and it took time to get to that compromise. I mean, I even have the vote totals here. The tax bill, 123 to 10 in the House, 55 to 12 in the Senate. The supplemental spending bill, 95-39 in the House, 50 to 16 in the Senate. The bonding bill, 91 in favor in the House, 39 against in the House. In the Senate, 53 to 12. I mean, this is broad bipartisan support. The other one, and we haven't talked about it, but I'm incredibly disappointed that the governor has vetoed the pensions bill. I think that was a mistake on the governor's part. I think it makes the problem worse before the next session, instead of putting us in a position that will make the problem easier to solve in the next session. The pensions bill passed the House 129 to 3 and passed the Senate 61 to 1. It was actually the idea of the Democrats to pass that bill, and we simply went along with it. But by vetoing that bill, COLAs and other things that will go into place that will make that problem much worse before the next legislative session, it will make the problem much more difficult to solve. All of the recommendations in that bill were the recommendations of the labor unions and their recommendations on how to fix the problem. So unfortunately, there will be setbacks in solving the pension problem before we get to session next year because of the governor's veto. And I don't know why exactly he vetoed that bill or who encouraged him to, but they were literally the suggestions of the unions and had support of the unions. And unfortunately now it will make it much more difficult to actually solve the future liabilities in those pensions.
If you come back as Speaker, are you going to take material steps to make sure that there is not the rush at the end that you said you didn't like and resulted in this?
When I come back as Speaker, I'm going to make every effort that I can to make sure these things don't happen. But I also want to remind folks that we have divided government, and while I did everything I could to prevent that rush at the end of session, Senator Bach, in his wisdom, decided that using that clock as a pressure point would benefit him. I don't know that it did, and unfortunately, I think Minnesotans lost out in that process.
What did you do to prevent the rush at the end?
Everything that I could.
Release your bonding bill before the last week?
Rachel,
I'm asking you. You said you did everything you could. I'm just wondering
I think
what's on that
you
list.
all have been around here long enough to understand how the legislative process works, and you knew that what we needed to do was decide on an amount together with the Democrats on how much the bonding bill would be. what was included in a $600 million bonding bill or an $800 million bonding bill really was irrelevant. We had an $800 million bonding bill that failed in the House, and we had a $1.4 billion bonding bill that failed in the Senate. So neither of those proposals was something that could achieve the sort of compromise that was going to pass both bodies. It took until the last night of session to get there, but I'll remind you that Senator Bach wouldn't even agree to a number. He wouldn't come off of 1.3 or 1.4 billion until 6 o'clock at night on Sunday night. That made it very difficult to get to the kind of compromise that was going to provide the level of transparency that I was comfortable with. But I did make a commitment to the people of Minnesota and to all of you numerous times that I was going to work right until the last minute to try to make sure that we had a bonding bill, and we did that. Unfortunately, we had an agreement that the Senate decided to add an amendment at the end that was not agreed to, and it put the bill in jeopardy, and the bill failed. Unfortunately, they realized the error in their ways, and they try to fix that in the last few minutes, but ran out of time. So it's unfortunate, and the people that are going to pay the price are the Minnesota communities that really need that road and bridge funding and other funding for the important projects that were in the bonding bill.
So 2 special sessions.
No, I think we can wrap it all up in one. I only suggest that we would have a special session on the tax bill in the event that we can't get to agreement on the other things. But I don't want the governor to feel like he can't sign the tax bill because there's disagreement on those 2 issues. There are not, and I think we just want to be clear about that. So we'll fix them as expeditiously as possible. So we look forward to the governor taking action on the tax bill, and we'll get together with him as soon as the other leaders are available. I'm not sure they're all available right now, but as soon as everybody's available, we'll be happy to get together with him. You know, and we want to respect his request to deal with the tax bill separately and not get that tangled up in the rest of this discussions about special sessions. So we'll look forward to his signature on that, and then we will look forward to getting together with the governor. So very good. Thank you all.
Thanks.